All right, we're in Habakkuk 2. Has everybody got a paper? All right, I'm going to finish chapter 2 today. And I'll be honest, this is kind of a difficult, not the easiest wording, I don't think. Maybe you'll find it easier than I will. But sometimes the prophets can get a little bit difficult. I thought this was a difficult one for me. And I'll show you why in just a second. Quick recap on Habakkuk. Very simply, Habakkuk's crying out because the people are in sin. God says, okay, I'm going to send Babylon to judge you. Habakkuk says, Lord, why are you going to send a people more wicked than we are to judge us? And then God brings comfort in saying, Habakkuk, don't worry about it. Even though they come and they overtake you, I'm still going to have my glory. I'll still fulfill all the promises. And now God's kind of talking about His judgment on Babylon. So let's kind of start in the notes. And let's start in the second paragraph of your notes. Everybody ready? My problem in understanding this section is whether or not Habakkuk is communicating that they were literally making their enemies drunk, or if this is some form of symbolism. Look at verse 15. It says, Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor, pressing him to your bottle, even to make him drunk, that you may look on his nakedness. You are filled with shame instead of glory. You also drink and be exposed as uncircumcised. The cup of the Lord's right hand will be turned against you, and utter shame will be on your glory. Now, when I read commentators, they're consistent in saying this is about Babylon, and I agree. The question becomes, is this some kind of symbolic language, or were they literally going around making their enemies drunk? And I don't think it matters either way, because the point is Babylon's still going to get judged for what they were doing. There are a lot of commentators who think they were literally making their enemies drunk. I don't know that I agree with that 100%, and I'll show you why. I think it's symbolic language about them maybe leading into false worship and that idea. So Babylon conquering and having this effect as far as saying, they're overtaking these people, but their influence was so strong on them with their false gods and with these other things, essentially they led them to false worship. Because, and I'll show you in a second, Babylon gets used that exact same way in the book of Revelation, and I think speaking about Jerusalem. But let's kind of go slow through just a little bit of this. Let's start in verse 17 here. It says, For the violence done to Lebanon will cover you. Look over at verse 17 in your notes. It says Lebanon is a reference to Canaan, and I put Deuteronomy 3:25 in there. You'll hear a lot in the Bible about the cedars of Lebanon. Lebanon was known for these big cedars, and it was the cedars of Lebanon that David used and Solomon used to build the temple. And also, there were in Tyre, Hiram, who was the king of Tyre, which was a city in Lebanon, this is where that wood would come from. Now, the temple was built by cedars of Lebanon. And then also, in Ezra 3:7, when they go back and rebuild the second one, then you get some of the same action there. So they keep getting all this wood from these people. Cedar in the Bible would be a unique study in and of itself. I'm telling you, if you just took a day and said, all right, I'm going to trace rocks in the Bible. I want to see how the Bible uses rocks. You'd come up with some really cool stuff. If you said, okay, I'm going to trace trees, just trace all the trees one day in the Scriptures, you would come up with a really cool study. Me and you didn't typically grow up thinking that way, right? Well, if you read James Jordan's Through New Eyes, he'll help you to think in that type of way. It's a free PDF online. But it's a book that really helped me just kind of think thematically about how the Bible uses certain elements. And the cedars of Lebanon are definitely one of those elements. So in verse 17, when it says, For the violence done to Lebanon will cover you, I take that to be God's telling Babylon, as many commentators do, that because of their violence done to the nations and to specifically the covenant people, and the plunder of beasts, which I would take not to be about them going through and killing mountain lions and goats, okay? How would I take beasts, do you think, in verse 17? Yeah, the different nations. Good, Gentile nations. I think that's a reference. So for what they've done to the covenant people as well as to the rest of the nations. Because you have to think, we emphasize the fact, because the Old Testament in the Bible is the covenant story of Israel, we emphasize the fact that Babylon's judgment's coming on Judah, right? But it's more than that. They judged all of these other nations as well. And in their judgment of these other nations, for the way they treated them, God's going to pay them back. One day we just need to go through and talk about Gentile nations in the Old Testament and just kind of talk about what God did to them. Because Gentile nations are said in the prophets, like in Isaiah and Jeremiah, they're said to be judged for some of the same reasons that Israel was, because of their wickedness. So God would send nations like Babylon against them. Does that make sense, everybody? All right. Look at the back half of verse 17. And the plunder of beasts which made them afraid, because of men's blood, and the violence of the land, and the city, and of all who dwell in it. Verse 18. What profit is the image, okay, that its maker should carve it, the mold image of a teacher of lies, that the maker of its mold should trust in it to make mute idols? And I take this, and many commentators do, to be talking about Babylon's false idols and their false images. They've trusted in that. What benefit is that at the end of the day? Absolutely none. But this is what they've done. Verse 19, woe, opposite of blessing, woe to him who says to wood, which Babylon was doing, awake, to silent stone, arise, it shall teach. Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, yet in it there is no breath at all. Everybody kind of get the point here? Babylon's coming. They've slaughtered all these nations. God's going to pay them back, though, because they've acted wickedly. They've trusted in these false gods, and it's of no avail to them. Simple enough? As hard as that language is, that's the gist I take away from that. And that fits with the rest of the story of Habakkuk in the way that we see it. Even though Babylon's coming, God's going to wipe them out. He'll have His glory, which is why verse 20 reminds us, the Lord is in His holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before Him. So even though they're coming, God's still going to judge them. Simple enough? Any questions? All right, let's dismiss in prayer. No? Okay. We'll do some more then. All right. Let's look at how Babylon gets used in the Bible. Where's the first place Babel shows up? Tower of Babel, Genesis 11, okay? So you get this Genesis 11 idea that Babel is going to be headquarters for this extremely wicked place, wicked worship, wicked false gathering, okay? It's not by chance that Daniel chapter 2, his first kingdom is who? Babylon, all right? That's no chances in the Scriptures, I don't think at all. I put in your notes there, look with me. Actually, let me just do this. Go down to the bottom where it says a study in itself, and we'll just start there, okay? One thing that is common is that when Israel goes into sin, they often get compared to the wicked enemies in the Old Testament. Now, Babel means gate of God, all right? So the original gate of God, think back to Genesis chapter 11, they were trying to make a way, essentially, back to God. Whatever you do with the Tower of Babel, whatever you want to do with it, I take it to be that the known nations of the world had gathered together, they had a city, and then in that city they built a tower to try to reach the heavens, okay? Well, that's essentially the same purpose of Israel. God planted a vineyard, He had a city, Jerusalem, in it He made a tower. Their goal was to be the gate of God. Through Israel, all men should have known to worship Yahweh. Everybody with me? Well, remember when Jacob had the dream? Jacob had a dream, and he saw angels ascending and descending on a ladder. You remember that? Go to John chapter 1. Let me remind you of this. Babel is the gate of God. He had this dream at Bethel. Bethel means the what? The house of God. Very good. John chapter 1. There was only one way of worship that would connect the earth back to heaven, that would connect men back to God. John chapter 1. Let's look in verse 43. We read. This is not in your notes, by the way. The following day, Jesus wanted to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets, the whole Old Testament, wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Nathanael said to him, "Anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said of him, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no deceit." Nathanael said to him, to Jesus, "How do you know me?" Jesus answered and said to him, "Philip, before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you." Nathanael answered and said to him, "Rabbi, teacher, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered and said to him, because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You will see greater things than these. And he said to him, most assuredly I say to you, hereafter you shall see heaven open and the angels of God doing what? Ascending and descending. There's Jacob's dream, okay? That's the fulfillment of Jacob's dream. That's how you need to read the Bible. Old Testament in light of the New Testament. They'll make connections all over the place, okay? So now we know who the true gate of God is. Who's the true Babel? Jesus. To say it another way, the New World Order, as some people might want to say it, I would call the New World Order the what? The new covenant in Christ. Everybody see the picture? I had somebody ask me the other day. They were like, you think you're in the new heavens and new earth? What's the New World Order? I said, the new covenant in Christ. Dude got his mind blown. It was hilarious. But anyway, so let's go to a couple places to where the Bible calls Jerusalem its enemies. Go to Revelation chapter 11, verse 8. For some of you, this will be a really good study because you haven't heard this before. So make sure you note this. One of the most important things I think you can do to help you in Bible interpretation is identify who Babylon is in the New Testament, specifically the book of Revelation. Because once you identify that, a whole lot of things start to fall in place. Revelation chapter 11, verse 8, and I would have to make some connections to show you how this gets to Babylon, which I won't do today, but I'm working on typing up something pretty big on Babylon, so when I get that done, it'll probably be about 7 or 8 pages, and I'll give it to you, okay? Revelation 11:8, speaking of the two witnesses, it says, their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city. There's only one city in the Bible, by the way, which is called the great city. Which is it? Jerusalem. Which spiritually is called who? Sodom and Egypt. See how it's a comparison? Zach, you sure it's Jerusalem? Yep, look at the next part. Where also our Lord was what? In what city was Christ crucified? There you go. See how the Bible calls Israel, who's going to apostate, its old enemies. So it's going to call them Sodom. It's going to call them Egypt. And I believe it's going to call them Babylon. All right? Go to Isaiah chapter 1. We'll look at a few more things here. Isaiah chapter 1. The Bible spends a lot of time, especially in the Old Testament, on Babylon. Isaiah chapter 1 has nothing to do with Babylon, but he's speaking to Israel, okay? Look at Isaiah 1:1. He says, the vision of Isaiah, the son of Amoz, which he saw concerning who? Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, kings of Judah. Now, who is Habakkuk prophesying to? Judah, right? Same people. Got it? All right, look over at verse 10 in chapter 1. It says, hear the word of the Lord, you rulers of... Give ear to the law our God, you people of... See how he's calling those people the former enemies of God? This is a common practice. You get all those wicked nations, and then when they go into sin, God begins to call them those things. Everybody with me? All right, let's look at what Isaiah said. Since he's talking about the same thing Habakkuk was, let's look at what Isaiah said about Babylon. Look over at Isaiah 13. This, I believe, is another dual prophecy. If you had to explain a dual prophecy, what would you say? What's a dual prophecy? An immediate fulfillment and a future fulfillment. An immediate fulfillment and give me an example. Remember David was told he would have someone sit on his throne, he would rule the nations. Solomon was immediate fulfillment. Jesus was the future fulfillment. In my interpretation of the Bible, I think all dual fulfillment prophecies are fulfilled in the New Testament. Okay? Or by 70 AD, to be for sure. Y'all understand that, at least the way I think? Are you cold? Okay. Does everybody get that idea as to how I get there? Yes. Sissy. Anyway, I'm kidding, I'm cold too. Verse 1, Isaiah 13. Proclamation against Babylon. The burden against Babylon, which Isaiah, son of Amoz, saw. Remember how Habakkuk started? The burden against Judah. Lift up a banner on high mountain. Raise your voice to them. Wave your hand, that they may enter the gates of my nobles. I have commanded my sanctified ones. I have also called my mighty ones for my anger. Those who rejoice in my exaltation. Not saying I exalted them. They're rejoicing, giving credit to somebody else. The noise of a multitude in the mountains, like that of many people. The tumultuous noise of the kingdoms of nations gathered together. The Lord of hosts musters the army for battle. They come from a far country, from the end of heaven, the Lord and his weapons of indignation, to destroy the whole land. Wail, for the day of the Lord is at what? It's coming against Babylon. It will come as destruction from the Almighty. Therefore all hands will be limp. Every man's heart will melt, and they will be afraid. Pangs and sorrows will take hold of them. They will be in pain as a woman in childbirth. They will be amazed at one another. Their faces will be like flames. He's speaking about Babylon. Now watch this. Behold, the what comes? A day of the Lord. Oh wait, if you're familiar with the Old Testament, you've got days of the Lord all over the place. People get to the New Testament and they think, well, that's the first time we've ever seen the day of the Lord. Like, no, there's days of the Lord everywhere. And what were all the other days of the Lord? When God would send a nation to judge another nation. Very good. Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel, with both wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate. He will destroy its sinners from it. For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be darkened in its going forth, and the moon will not cause its light to shine. I'll ask a question. Is the sun, moon, and stars still in the sky? Is Babylon still a world power? So is this symbolic language? Yeah? Yeah? Does everybody see how I get to that point? Okay. Look down at verse 17. Here's why I think it's dual. I have no doubt that this immediately in the context refers to the Medes destroying Babylon. Everybody with me? Verse 17 says, Behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, who will not regard silver and as for gold, they will not delight in it. Also, their bows will dash the young men to pieces, and they will have no pity on the fruit of the womb. Their eye will not spare the children. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldeans' pride, will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. Everybody see the picture? I have no doubt that's in the immediate context talking about God's judgment using the Medes on Babylon. But I would say the way this language gets used specifically by our Lord Jesus in the New Testament, the exact language from Isaiah 13, 9 and 10, it gets pulled straight from there, and Jesus applies it to Jerusalem in the first century. Okay? Taryn, make sure you get this part, okay? Go to Matthew 24. Hold your spot in Isaiah 13 and go to Matthew 24. Too late? It's all right. Matthew 24. I want you to watch how Jesus uses this. Babel is really important in the Bible. Jeremiah in 50 and 51 spends a ton of time on Babel too. Look at Matthew 24, 29. Tell me if this sounds familiar. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven will be shaken. Everybody got it? Sound familiar? I'm saying, man, that's Isaiah 13, word for word copied. Honest to God, I had somebody the other day. I was talking to him, it's probably about 2 or 3 months ago, and he pulled this verse out and he said, Zach, how do you think that's happened? And I just looked at him and smiled. I was like, are you serious? There's seriously a gap somewhere here in the way that we're interpreting the Bible, okay? So you've got that type of thought. If you remember in Daniel's dreams in Genesis 37, remember when Daniel had the dream, the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed down to him? They were used to that type of language referring to government or people in power over them, okay? So that's not foreign to the Scripture. Because Jacob's immediate response to Joseph was, well, your mother and I and your brothers bow down to you. He knew what sun, moon, and stars language was like. They weren't the ones with the disconnect. You and I are the ones with the disconnect from the language, I think.
Even in Job, he quotes about the constellations and stuff. So
I would have to look at the context of it, but yeah, I'm not as familiar with Job. There's stuff.
I got stuck in, I guess the other day, I was on TikTok, I was scrolling through, it was a live, and there was a young man that was on there, and he was teaching, and I was like, holy cow, but it's exactly your perspective, talking about the sun, moon, and stars being symbolic. And it was refreshing, I guess, in a way, because again, here's another young pastor or a young man that's an evangelist or however, but yet he again was combating these people, talking about where are we in the timeline.
Yeah.
And he fell right along, and he was just, if I didn't know any better, y'all been studying together, because it was interesting to see someone else, from another.
I just get all my stuff off the internet, so nothing I study is original. I just ripped it off.
But she was talking, just the symbolic language, that's what he kept coming back to, talking about symbolic language and Old Covenant, New Covenant, this is this, we can't be.
You only have the right. Now hear this. This is important because I think people are like, man, you're just pulling symbols out of nowhere. Like, no, I'm pulling them from somewhere. You only have the right to symbolize something if the Bible gives you warrant to do it. Scripture interprets what? That's got to, and if you'll do that principle, then you'll be like, oh, okay. Just follow that all the way through the Bible, because people don't think that way. I was talking to somebody this week, somebody that's been teaching the Bible for 30 years, and I was talking about the second Exodus. Somebody that's been teaching the Bible for 30 or 35 years. You know what they asked me? What's the second Exodus? And I was like, what? That's the New Testament, dude. Anyway, where am I at? Let me keep going here. Look at Matthew 23. I want to make sure you get some of this stuff just quickly on 23. Look at 29, 23, 29. 23:29 says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. Who's he talking to? Because you build the tombs of the prophets and adorn the monuments of the righteous, and say, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. All those religious leaders in the past didn't want to hear the prophets, so they killed them. 31, you are therefore witnesses against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your father's guilt. Paul said in 1 Thessalonians 2:14-16 that they were filling up the measure of their father's guilt, because they were killing those Jesus sent. Serpents, brood of vipers, how can you escape the condemnation of hell? Therefore, indeed, I send you prophets, wise men, and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city, that on you may come all the righteous bloodshed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Assuredly, I say to you, all these things will come upon what? This generation. So then you go to the book of Revelation. Go to Revelation 16 for me. Revelation chapter 16. Remember Galatians 4? What was the purpose of Galatians 4? The bondwoman and her son, the old covenant, had to be what? Cast out, so that the new covenant in Christ could remain on the scene. Well, Revelation is no different. And when people try to rip this book away from the rest of the Bible, I think they're doing great harm. I really do. Look at 16:6. Take all these bowls and judgments, and let me just kind of help you think about it. All of these judgments are covenantal judgments found in the law. They're not anything new. 16:6 says, for they have shed the blood of the saints and the who? And you have given them blood to drink, for it is their just due. Now you just read Matthew 23. Who killed the saints and the prophets? Jerusalem, those Jewish leaders. When did Jesus say they would be judged? That generation. When did the book of Revelation say it would happen? Soon. See, it all fits. Like, that's perfect. Look at 17:6. I saw the woman, this is speaking of the scarlet beast, Babylon the harlot, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of the harlots. Write this down. I didn't put this in your notes. Write down Revelation 17:5 with Ezekiel 16:44-48. Revelation 17:5 with Ezekiel 16:44-48. Many commentators note there that Ezekiel is saying the mother of all the harlots is the Old Covenant apostate Israel. That's the harlot passage, Ezekiel 16, where it talks about over and over how she's a harlot. Same thing Hosea said. But look at 17:6. It says, I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the who? Saints, and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. Well, who killed them? Jesus said Israel did. They're the ones that killed him. So that helps you get that mindset. Now remember earlier when I was talking about the drunkenness and how I didn't know if Babylon was literally going around making people drunk, or if they were talking about the influence of their worship and their culture. Look over at 18:3. 18:3 says, speaking of Babylon, who's just fallen, for all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. The merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. Notice how it says it was through the wine? Well, the controlling influence of Jerusalem was that they had effect on false worship on all these nations. They were supposed to be the true Babel, the true gate of God, but they weren't. They were apostate. And instead, they played the harlot and committed fornication with the beast, who I take to be Rome and Nero. Okay? Make sense there? Does that kind of help you to see how when you can identify Babylon, that's a huge piece of the puzzle? Because if you have something that... All right, let's think about this. In the Westminster Confession of Faith, they said that the papacy, Rome, was Babylon the harlot. Now, what's the problem with that? What do we know from what we just read about Babylon the harlot? What did she do? She murdered the Old Testament prophets and the saints of Jesus Christ, right? Well, the papacy wasn't around then. So how did they murder the Old Testament prophets? They can't. It's had to be somebody that was around then. That's part of the problem. There's only one person that this can be. It's Old Covenant Israel. That's it. That's the only option. That was one of the first dominoes that fell for me, and that's why I think Babylon is so important in the Bible. Because this doesn't just come up in the book of Revelation. You have all of those other predictions about this Jewish judgment that was going to come. Look back with me at Revelation 2. Look in verse 8, the church at Smyrna. Revelation 2:8. Everybody ready? We read. And to the angel of the church of Smyrna write, these things says the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. I know your works, tribulation, and poverty, but you are rich. And I know the blasphemy of those who say they are what? Jews, and are not, but are a synagogue of who? Who's that about? Old Covenant Israel. Remember what the Apostle Paul said in Romans chapter 9, verse 6? Not all Israel is what? Just because you were Jewish doesn't mean you're truly a son of Abraham. Remember what Jesus said in John 8? Don't tell me you have Abraham as your father. Abraham's not your father unless you have the same faith as believing Abraham. These are the same people. We've got it in the Gospels, we've got it in the Epistles, and now we've got it in the book of Revelation, and guess where it's all predicted at? In the prophets, in the Old Testament. If we know this book and see it in connection, all of this Babylon stuff, it starts to make sense. Oh, Israel became Sodom. Israel became Egypt. Israel became Babel. It's all the same stuff. We have ripped this so far out of context, I think. We have made it impossible to understand. No wonder people are looking at the Bible saying, huh? Like, let's just let it interpret itself. If we would do that, things become clear. Look over at Revelation 3.
But then they tell us too, like, you won't ever understand because you're not supposed to.
I hate that. Now, hear me say this, because I do not think that I'm ever going to be able to open up this book and tell you, man, I'm 100% certain about everything that's in this book. But please hear me say this. If He's the God of the universe, and He made me and you, and the same Holy Spirit that lives in me and you is the one that authored this book, I think we are foolish to say, well, we're just not going to understand some things. Okay? Now, I'm willing to say, in my lifetime, for what I have to do and all the things in my life, I'm never going to understand every single thing that's in this book. I don't think I am. But you want to ask me who Babel is in the book of Revelation, I will stand on a tailgate in front of the president and say, I am 100% positive as to who Babylon is in the book of Revelation. It is a no stinking brainer, okay?
Well, I mean, I look at it as, there are parts I'm not ever going to understand, but there are parts I don't, you may. But it all comes down to God gave us this word for who? Us.
Yeah.
To use. So if we study it and we find it, I mean, He's not going to put something in there that He doesn't want us to know or to try to figure out or give us answers to. I mean, there are some things I'm sure we'll ponder, we'll never understand the Trinity, we'll never understand how all that necessarily can be all one, but
That's the biggest cop-out I hear from most people. Like, if I present something, especially they're not, like, that they can't do anything with, they'll always say, well, there's some things we're not meant to understand. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Like, but I'm very confident about some things. There are plenty of things in this book, not just Revelation, but in the prophets especially, and I just told you, like the Habakkuk deal. Maybe he's talking about literally going around making people drunk. I don't know. Maybe that's what they did. I don't know. It doesn't seem to me the way the Bible uses that language that that's what he's talking about.
And it could be both.
It could be both.
Because how many times have we read that they had drunken
You got another thing in here, like, okay, have y'all heard people lately talking about the river Euphrates drying up? You hear? Okay, I'm hearing that all the time. Okay, well, guess what happened whenever the Medes came in Daniel 5 and took Babylon? Guess what happened? The Euphrates River dried up. Okay, well, now when Babylon gets judged in Revelation 15, speaking about Babylon, who I perceive to be Jerusalem and Old Covenant Israel, guess what happens to the Euphrates? It dries up. But guess what song they sing? The Song of Moses. The Song of Moses was sang on the backside of the Exodus right before they went into the Promised Land. Well, guess what happens here? Right when Babylon's judged, they sing the Song of Moses right before the resurrection happens. It's the same story. And I'm like, what are we doing? Connect the stuff, people. Look at Revelation 3 and we'll be done. Revelation chapter 3. And let's look at verse 8. Revelation 3:8. This is to the church at Philadelphia. I know your works. See, I have set before you an open door, and no one can shut it. For you have a little strength, and have kept my word, and have not denied my name. Indeed, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say they are what? And are not. Romans 9:6. But lie. Indeed, I will make them come and worship before your what? Before your feet. See, there's some of the enemies that God would place under their feet. What did Psalm 110:1 say? The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your what? See the connection? All of that's about to happen shortly. See, there's your Psalm 110:1. Then the Messiah comes in. Post-millennials missed that one. Anyway, does that help kind of in your thoughts of Babel? Y'all see why that's important, per se? Any questions? We'll be done. Ask away. We'll finish Habakkuk, and I don't know that I'll finish it next week. It might take me 2 more weeks. I'm going to try to finish it. But essentially, Habakkuk's response is going to be, in hearing all this, it's going to be what ours should be. It's going to be to worship. Now, you think about what benefit me and you have. We can look back at this story and say, oh yeah, God was faithful to Israel. He brought the Messiah who brings men back into the presence of God. They're living in the middle of it saying, Lord, we're having to trust you. We're having to trust you to do this. But that doesn't mean that you and I don't have to trust the Lord, because even though your context is different than Habakkuk's was, do you really want to stand up and say you don't have things going on in your life that you don't need to trust the Lord with? How much more confidence should it bring to you that God's been faithful in everything He's ever said, that He'll be faithful to you in your life? Amen? Where are we going after Habakkuk? Not Hebrews. I am not ready for that. Huh? I don't know. What do y'all want? I don't think we can go wrong understanding these prophets, but I understand how hard it is. If it's mentally taxing, I don't want y'all to have to come in here and say, man, it's not enjoyable. I don't want to go to Sunday school. Are y'all feeling that way in Habakkuk or no? So, do you want me to do another minor prophet? I don't know that I'm ready to teach Jeremiah. That would take the rest of the year. Do you want me to do another minor? All right, let me pick another minor one. We'll just start picking some of those off. Zephaniah would be a good one because he's talking about the same. Zephaniah is essentially talking about the same thing Habakkuk is. So you start looking at those in tandem.
Well, I'm listening to something that said that the gospel is Zephaniah.
The gospel's in all of them.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, it's in all of them. It's in the just shall live by faith, Habakkuk 2:4. That's the gospel. So, okay, any questions? Are we good? Are y'all okay with another prophet? Okay. Y'all good with another prophet? Okay. I just don't want to bore y'all. But it don't matter where you start, guys. If you start in the old or if you start in the new, I'm going to the other one. It don't matter. So, let's pray.